Today, I will show you how to build this awesome pool table from scratch using mainly plywood. It also happens to convert into a dining table when it is not in use. I will walk you through everything from making the frame, the ball return system, the cushion rails, applying felt, and also how to convert it into a dining table. By the end of this video, you will be able to build one for yourself.
People who say it cannot be done should not interrupt those who are doing it. By George Bernard Shaw.
Just for a little backstory on my first pool table. I bought it from a guy on Facebook who advertised that he builds tables for a living. This is the pool table that I requested from him, and this is what I got. I was quite disappointed, to say the least. It had an MDF play base. It moved when I had to lean on it. The cushions would move every time the ball hits it. Being a DIYer, I later did my best to salvage it by renovating the cushions, making them a bit more sturdy, and building a proper ball return system using PVC pipes. I have been designing my dream pool table on Sketchup for the past 6 months or so. I had to apply for leave at work in order to tackle this challenging build in a timely manner. It was quite a tight schedule, but I was determined to win. I designed it around a 7-foot single pool slate with a simple ball return system in place. I will have these SketchUp files available in my description for those that are interested. And maybe later I can even make plans for these for a small fee, of course, for my troubles if you would be interested. I used mainly 3 sheets of plywood to build this whole structure. I will have a price and material breakdown at the end of this video. My name is Roderick and welcome to Shaw Woodworking DIY. I will be breaking down my boards into smaller chunks before we head back into my shop. I don't have a track saw, so what I do here is I measure the distance between the blade and the edge of my circular saw. Mine is 3.6 centimeters, so whichever length I need, I just add 3.6 to that. I use my trusty square and then I place my straight edge down, clamp it down, and then I cut away. I've been having quite accurate cuts throughout this whole build. I want my pool table to have beefy legs, not like those old ones, right? So I ripped up my pieces to 14.5 centimeters first. Then I set my blade to 45 degrees using my digital angle gauge. Then we make 45-degree cuts on each side of the board. This will make it have a thick beefy leg, as you can see up here with the illustration. With our miters all done on each side of these boards, now we will need to cut up these 10.4 centimeter squares that we'll be using to close up the top and the bottom of the legs. Now when we get to the glue up part of things, it was pretty simple. We apply a couple of strips of painter's tape along the edges to align the boards, apply glue on each of the surfaces, come back with the brad nailer, shoot a couple pins in there, it will hold it in place. Once I have 3 of the boards aligned, that is when I come around and put that 10.4 centimeter board that we had cut earlier on to close the top and the bottom. I repeated that same process for all the 4 legs. Then I left the legs overnight for the glue to set properly. As you may know, with any pool table, adjustability of the legs is quite important for leveling of the table. So I installed these nuts at the base of the legs. Most people use a chisel and a hammer for this process. I've always disliked that process, so I tried this time around to come with a palm router and I absolutely love it. I'm never going back to chisels again. That process really sucks. So this is the fastest way I've ever done it and I'm never going back. And then I applied some epoxy, mixed it up, then I put in the nuts and let them in there to sit. Now we need to cut up some 12 by 12 centimeter squares that will be used for the adjustable feet. So we need to find the center here. This is where the bolts will be installed. So we're using my favorite system of making these holes. I'll use my router again, carve out this hole, use epoxy and secure the bolt to that part. But before we get to that, I need to just cut off the little edges so you can make it a little fancier shape than just a boring square. My workshop is quite a small shed that I built a couple of years ago, so I needed to take out my table saw in order for me to cut out these longer stretches that I need for the build. Then I went on and cut them to the final length using a speed square and a circular saw. Using plans in my woodworking projects is something that I've really been getting into lately and been helping me a lot in my planning phase of things and my building phase of things. It helps me a lot to get this process way smoother. It reminds me of the rule 8 of art rules that I used in another video of mine. Do not try and create and analyze at the same time. They are different processes. Let's glue up these side legs now. So applying generous glue using a speed square as well to make sure that everything is nice and square. I applied the inner piece of the board, apply some brad nails, come back with a screw to apply clamping pressure throughout. And as you had seen earlier on, I also applied pocket screws to make sure that it's nicely tight and tucked into the sides as well. While I was waiting for those sides to dry up, I decided to go ahead and glue up the ball rails as well. So we'll be using these in the ball return system that I made for this pool table. I left those overnight to set. The next morning I came back to work on those holes from the brad nails and the gaps from the joints. I filled those up with some glue and some sawdust mix, and then I sanded it up all the way up to 220 grit. Then I took those legs outside to my driveway where we'll be mounting on the longer aprons of the table. It's basically the same setup as we did with the shorter aprons. I started out by applying some pocket holes to the inner pieces and applied glue generously into the inner part of the leg. Then the table basically aligned itself when you apply it properly in those corners with those pocket hole screws. After securing that inner apron, we apply glue generously onto the outer apron, and then we apply a couple of brad nails just to make sure that the wood doesn't move when we come down with the clamping pressure. I used a couple of pocket hole screws to hold it down while the glue dries up. I did the same thing to the opposite end as well. These pieces that I'm applying pocket holes to are the ones that will be holding up the pool slate. I apply glue generously to the ends and then I secure them with pocket holes. So I had to make sure that they are flush to the bottom of the frame, so this will help us to have a more even playing surface. So as you can see, I've got 5 of these slats, 3 of them on this side of the center and 2 of them on that side of the center. You'll see why I arranged it this way when we work on the ball return system. I saw this interesting drop-down drawer from one of my favorite woodworking channels on YouTube, DIY Montreal. I aspire to make more content that is similar to her style of videos. We need to make an 8mm groove on each side of the drawer. I started out the groove at 2.5 centimeters from the front and made it 30 centimeters long. From the base, it's about 3 centimeters up. I did the same thing to the opposite edge as well. In order to have the drawer pivot, we will need to have a small pin placed here about 1 centimeter inward from the front groove. I decided to add this hardwood trim piece to the front edge to hide the plywood edging, since this will be the most visible part. I had previously pre-cut this board that will be used for the base for the ball return structure. Here I'm cutting up the drawer that needs to be slightly smaller than that width. On this drawer piece, I went in about 2 centimeters from the front edge, found the center and made an 8mm hole there. I have this 8mm steel rod that I bought from a scrapyard one day that I'll be using for those holes that I drilled out. I secured them inside by using super glue. The metal pin on the drawer will be running inside this groove and it will pivot on this bottom pin that we have. This is basically the mechanism. I don't really like how steep this angle looks, so I wanted it to be a less steep angle. So I had to remove that pin, fill that hole with a wooden dowel, and then I set the new hole to be directly below where the groove ends. This made a more suitable angle. Then I applied super glue once I was satisfied with the angle. And I did that same process to the opposite face. I'm not sure if you've noticed my mistake already in this build, but basically what I did here, I made 2 pieces of the same exact side, not opposite sides, as you can see with this groove here. I was really pissed off at myself once I realized this, as you can see with my legs shaking. I was trying to figure out what am I going to do next, but there was nothing else to do. I just had to remake this whole thing and make the groove to the appropriate side. So I cut out that dowel and I made a groove on the opposite side where it's supposed to be. I have this chevron plywood pattern that I had left over from my DIY Mox and Vice build that I did about a year ago. I thought this would be the perfect time to get it to use. I cut it to size and I sanded it down all the way up to 220 grit. I found the center of this. I got this wooden handle. I drilled an 8mm hole in the center of it. Then I glued an 8mm dowel in it. Now I had to paint it red, of course, since I'm a fan of red. Then I left that to dry properly as I went outside to start working on the ball rails. So with these rails, we need to cut them to a 10-degree bevel on the miter saw. This angle is just enough to allow the balls to flow easily into the center console area. The center pockets will be cut at a 90-degree angle. The corner rails will have a 45-degree cut on each side, making it a sharp, pointy thing. Now with those cuts done, let's assemble this ball return system and see if this thing will work as planned. This center board needs to be mounted at an incline. The easiest way I could think of was pocket holes. I got this jig a few months back and I absolutely love it. It really speeds up my flow while I'm trying to tackle a project. My neighbor's kids saw me busy working outside and they wanted to lend a hand to see closely what I've been busy with. I applied screws to the first pocket holes and then I angled the board, clamped it a little bit, and then I came through with the screws and screwed it in place. I screwed on these small pieces to help me attach the rail to the bottom of the table. So I aligned it centrally and then I started screwing it on. At this point, I started feeling like I was a pool table mechanic under the hood there, getting sawdust all up in my eyes. I couldn't record the process of how exactly I made these cutouts due to some technical difficulties, but basically I just used my oscillating tool and made a quick cutout of these. When mounting these rails, I only used pin nails and pocket screws with no glue needed, just in case I might need to work on these rails later on. So with these center rails, I found the center of the table. Then I went on and used the scrap piece of wood to make sure that I would mount that rail below the slate bed. This also applied to the corner pockets as well. I used the same process of using that scrap piece of wood to align the rails. After mounting all the rails, I had to give it a test and I noted this part was busy blocking one of the balls. So I got my oscillating tools real quick and I cut it out. I tested again and everything was working smoothly, and then I called it a night. As you can see, my table feet are looking a little bit different from what we had done earlier. I added this circular piece to give the bolt a little bit more support. Then I spray painted it red. I left them out to dry a little bit, then I came back and applied some painter's tape on it to protect it from overspray when we're spraying the pool table. I had to ask my lovely wife to come and help me with this pool table since it's quite a handful right now. We then flipped the table and installed those adjustable feet on the bottom. So when it comes to color of the table, I wanted it to be dark gray or charcoal. So I mixed it to my satisfaction, then I spray painted the whole table structure with it. After the first coat of that water paint, I could see all the little gaps and imperfections in the table, so I filled those with some glue, then I lightly sanded the table over, and then I gave it a second coat. Now it's time for me to have a tea break and watch some paint dry. You, in the meantime, can just smash that like button for me. Don't worry, I'm waiting. Please can you just go ahead and just click it? Thank you very much for doing that. After that water paint dried up properly, I came back with some polyurethane. I gave it 2 coats, sanding in between, and I had a nice finished product. Our pool table is coming together nicely. So this is one of the most important part of any good pool table. some quality ball rails. So we'll start off by cutting off some hardwood strips that we'll be using to cover the edges of the plywood on the top rail piece. I glued on the hardwood strips to both of the long rails and the short rails. I bought this second-hand slate from a guy that builds pool tables professionally. It needed some work removing old contact cement and some debris from sitting outside. Our rails will be 2 plywood pieces thick, one piece will be concealed inside and then the one with the hardwood trim will be visible on the outside. I lost the footage of how I cut these 45-degree cuts on the corners, but it's basically simple cuts that I did on the miter saw. Now when we get to the ball pockets, I used these rubber pocket liners to guide me to make templates that I'll be using to make all 4 corners and also the center pockets. So with a good quality rail, it's very important that when a ball hits it, it does not move. So you get this effect by mounting it to the slate or to the table itself. I needed 18 of these balls to make that possible. The ready-made balls were quite pricey, so I decided to make my own using a threaded rod and some nuts. So I used a 5-minute epoxy to permanently secure these nuts to the balls. I got out my favorite chair and started working on securing these balls to the inner plywood piece. After installing all those balls, it was time to glue up the 2 rail pieces together. For all the 4 rails, we'll do that. Only now that we have the solid rail, we can then cut out those pockets using our pocket templates. This is another kid from my neighborhood that's quite interested in woodworking as well. His name is Mpumuzo. So that's actually why I started a YouTube channel anyway, to empower people with this awesome skill that I learned from this platform as well. So how are you liking the video so far? I'd really like to know your input. It took a really long time processing this video. I'm glad you made it this far. We're not done yet though. Let's continue into the soft wood component of the rail. I will be using a pine board for this part that we will be milling up first, then we go ahead and laminate 2 boards together that will actually be stronger and hold a much straighter edge than just having 1 pine board alone. Once I have all my 6 laminated pieces dry, I will then cut them down to 85 centimeters, which is actually longer than the length of this rail part here. Then we head over to the table saw and continue milling these laminated pieces, cutting a fresh edge on each side, milling it down to 3 centimeters wide and thick. We'll start out by making a cutout for my rubber cushion. This is more of an English snooker kind of rail that is more squarey, and that's the only one I have access to in my area. So I need to make a cutout for my rubber cushion to sit here. A lot of videos on YouTube have more of the American kind of style rubber cushion, which looks like this. Then we need to go ahead and make a cutout for the strip of wood that will be used to hold the cloth in. Don't worry, even I was confused the first time when I saw this on a video, but it will make a lot of sense when we get to the part where I apply the cloth to the rails. That's all the milling that we'll need to be doing to the soft rail. Now we need to go ahead and apply some contact cement to the rubber bed itself on the wood and as well as on the rubber. So how contact cement really works, you need to leave these two parts that you already applied to, let them dry for about 5 minutes till it's dry to the touch, and then when you bond those two together, it will make a permanent bond to each other. We did that to all 6 of the rails. Then we moved all of the rail pieces back into the workshop for some more refining and making it one solid unit. We then had to remove the pool slate, which is quite heavy, I might say. It's like the weight of 2 grown men. And then we got it out of the way. After doing that, we went on and tested the ball return just to make sure everything is going well before we put the table into the house. I had to do some sanding on the rails just to make sure everything is ready and smooth for painting, filling up all those little brad nail holes that we have as well. So I want my ball rails to be one solid unit. I thought the best way to do this was by using pocket holes. So I drilled holes in each of the smaller rails, then aligned them, put a pocket screw in. When I got that alignment, I went on and drilled an 8mm hole to the side of the rail. That will allow me to put in an 8mm dowel as well, which made the frame quite stable. I left that glue to set overnight, then the next day I took the whole frame inside the house to make sure that it still fits well to the table, which it did. I wanted to add these rubber corners here, but I want them to be flush with the top of the rails. I marked out where it will be positioned, then I went on and routed out these sections. It's quite important that it is flush to the top because we will be adding the dining top to the top of this thing, so it needs to be flat. I made those cutouts to all the 6 pockets. Then we go ahead, now it's time to do some painting to the top of these rails. As you can see, it's quite a lot of work that we're doing into this pool table. I also underestimated it. I thought I'd finish within a week, but it took me about 2 weeks or so. So I gave it the same paint as I did on the base, 2 coats of the water paint, and then I came back with the clear polyurethane varnish and I gave it about 3 coats of that because this is the most used surface. I left that polyurethane to cure properly for 24 hours. The next day I worked on the insulation of the ball rails. This will try and reduce the sound that we'll have. I used some faux leather and some contact cement. This is how it sounds, the differences. It sounds a little better. The sound is a little deadened a little bit. I apply that faux leather on all the rail surfaces. There is some kind of improvement I can hear, and so I apply that faux leather on all the rail surfaces. I did some further tests on my rail system and I noted whenever my drawer was full with all the balls, it had some cracking sounds when I started opening it, so I knew it wouldn't last long. So I decided to make another drawer system using some pull-out drawers. With this one, I wanted to have a slight decline on the drawer. I cut out these angular pieces that will help to give me that decline. And I went on and removed those pins that we had and glued those angular pieces to the bottom of those side rails. I used some brad nails to temporarily hold the base in place, then I secured it with some screws. I'll be using that same pattern plywood face that we had in our old drawer. I'll remove it there and put it on the newer drawer. This time around I'll put some glue to give it a stronger bond. I use some double-sided tape for an easier installation of the drawer. I actually love this design way more than that first one that we had, because this one, it can hold all the weight of the balls as well as it's more sturdy. And the other thing that I like about it is that the balls just align themselves towards the front of the drawer due to that decline thing that we put in. So this is where our adjustable feet will come in handy. Not all floors are created level, mine is not exempt to that rule. So it's important to make sure that your table has been leveled properly prior to bringing in your slate, because once that heavy slate comes in, the table's not moving an inch. From the research I've done on which way is best to apply felt, most people usually position their slate in this across the table manner. Then you wipe down the slate to make sure you remove all debris. Then I went ahead and laid my felt and I folded it over there and asked my wife to come and help me so we can cut it properly. The leftover part will be the part that we'll be using for the rails. I use my aluminium straight edge to make some marks with the chalk on the cloth. These marks are used to guide me to see how much I need to stretch the cloth from each side. So I folded the long sides over and applied some contact cement on the cloth. Then I followed up by applying the cement on the edges of the slate. I let it dry to the touch for 5 minutes or so. Then I secured it to one side. So at this point of the build, my leave at work was already over, so I had to abandon ship while making this and attend to an emergency I had at work. So I came the next day and then I came back and finished up everything properly. After securing the long sides, I went on to the shorter sides. This is where you do the final stretch outs, where we won't have any of these creases anymore. I was using the side of the razor to help me put more pressure onto the joint. Now I think we need to head back into the workshop and finish up those rails that we had started, so we can end up playing pool. I made these 15 centimeter shallow holes that will be recesses for the screws that we'll apply here. That's how we'll mount the soft rail to the plywood rail. I use some clamps to hold it tight to the frame and make sure that it is flush to the top of the rails. Then I go ahead and insert those screws. I did that to all the 6 rails. Following that, we need to trim these soft rails so that they match the pocket itself. So I drew a straight line from the pocket outside, cut it with the jigsaw and then followed up with the razor blade. And for the center pockets, I drew that same line, but then this time around I added a centimeter wider on each side, then I cut it out. So this is the hardwood strip that we'll be using to hold down the cushion cloth. We cut it down to size prior to putting the cloth on. With the cloth left over from the slate, we'll need to cut up 6 of these rail pieces that are roughly to the same dimension. So when it's time to apply the cloth, you need to overlap the cloth toward yourself, and then with that tight fitting strip that we have, we hammer it in, holding that cloth in tightly, and then we trim the excess off, the excess that is furthest from you. Then we flip that cloth over. Following this, we will need to flip that whole rail structure over. Then we'll use our nail gun to tightly hold in that cloth. The tricky part that comes when you're doing this thing is mainly when it comes to the corner parts. So here you need to try and tuck those corners in strategically to avoid any unsightly folds and so on, as you can see me doing here. This is my second time making cushion rails, so I think I'm getting a hang of it a little bit. I think when I get to my 5th pool table build, I'll probably have all of these skills honed in by then. I think I really enjoyed this build. I like building pool tables, to say the least. It's quite fulfilling and challenging. This probably won't be my last pool table I build. I finished up all of those rails and then I headed inside and set and balanced the slate itself. It was quite balanced throughout, but I just had one low spot on this side of the table. Then we just used a piece of cloth, then we folded it up to balance out that slate on that side. Following this, we installed the cushion rails, and it was quite an amazing moment at this time. We've been waiting for this for more than 2 weeks now. And of course, we had to play a quick game of pool right after putting down the cushions. Before tightening anything, we were just too excited to wait for anything else. Then after this game, we went on and tightened down the rails from the bottom, as you can see here. I made this piece of plywood, I put some pocket screws on with some double-sided tape, and then I tightened down the nut to hold the cushions down. I swear this is the last component of the build. Our pool table dining table is almost done. I got this melamine board that has this quite interesting grayish pattern. So I cut it down to size in my driveway again, then took it into my workshop to apply some 1 centimeter thick edge banding all around the edges to protect this melamine board. As we know, it swells up when it gets in contact with water. Then I took those doors inside. Since I do not want to be moving these doors on and off every time I want to play, I decided to put some hinges on this thing. But sadly, I bought these small hinges that did not work for the task that I needed them to do. As you can see with this illustration here, it hits against the door, yet I wanted to be flush against the legs. So I had to abandon the doors for now and continue working on the rubber pockets for now. So I cut them up, fit them in. Then the next week, I went out and got the perfect door hinges for this task that I needed for. I used this piece of MDF that will help me size up and place my hinges correctly in order to have my doors flush to the legs. Then with some assistance from my wife again, we screwed on the doors easily. So this 2.5 centimeter gap was not part of the plan. I didn't foresee this hinge issue that we dealt with just now. But having a gap is not the end of the world. I had to cut up some 10 centimeter strips of 4mm plywood. Then I glued and screwed it to the bottom of this door, and then the gap was gone. Easy. Now as I round down this rack, let me break down the material and costs that went into the build, and if it is worth it building your own or buying your own professional one. So building this pool table myself roughly costed me about 7,000 Rand or $380. Compared to those professional companies out there that are selling it locally, it's about 20,000 Rand or that's $1,000, $1,080. So comparing the two, I would think the DIY route is the cheapest one or the easier one, especially if you know what you're doing or you are confident in what you're doing. Like myself, I didn't know much, but I was confident in my abilities to do something complex like this, and I did it. I think I'll go ahead and start making for people one day, and maybe I can make a buck or two, end up making a big company, show billiards or something like that. I'm putting it out there in the universe now. It's going to happen. Thank you for watching my video. Have a pleasant day.